poor widow gave Cowboy shelter, never expecting he would become her husband. The wind came off the plains that night like something alive and hungry. Margaret felt it push against the farmhouse door, testing the hinges, looking for a way inside. She stood with her hand on the frame, watching the dust rise in the distance, just shapes and movement in the darkness. But something in her knew. Something was coming. She had learned to listen to that feeling 3 years ago, when the fever took her husband. Thomas had coughed himself hollow in the room behind her, and she had stood in this very doorway, hearing the wind carry away his last small breaths. Since then, she had learned that some silences meant death, and some meant warning. This one meant both. The figure came into view slowly, like a memory surfacing. A man on horseback, but not sitting straight, leaning. One hand gripped the saddle horn, while the other hung loose and dark. Even from this distance, she could see the blood. Margaret did not think. She had learned not to think in moments like these. Thought was a luxury for people with time. She pulled her shawl tight and stepped out into the October cold. The cowboy did not see her coming. His eyes were fixed on something beyond the horizon, beyond the ranch, beyond maybe even this world. His horse had stopped of its own accord, the animal wise enough to know that its rider had nothing left to give. The saddle beneath him was slick with wet darkness. "Come down," Margaret said. Her voice sounded thin against the wind, but she said it again, louder. "Come down or fall down. Either way, you'll come inside." The cowboy's head turned slowly, as if his neck had forgotten how to move. His face was pale beneath 3 days of beard, and his eyes held the kind of hollow that comes from riding too long with pain. He looked at her like she was a vision, something his fever had conjured. "There's nothing here for you," Margaret said, and she meant it. She meant, "I have no money, no medicine, no hope. Only a house and a stove and hands that know how to work." The cowboy tried to lift himself from the saddle. His left leg came over, but when his boot hit the ground, something gave way. He fell forward into the dust like a marionette with cut strings, and Margaret caught him because there was no one else to catch him. He was heavy and burning hot, even through her shawl, even through the October cold. "Easy," she whispered, though she did not know if she was speaking to him or to herself. "Easy." She half carried, half dragged him into the house. His boot left a dark trail in the dust. His arm hung across her shoulders like a yoke, and she could feel him slipping between consciousness and something else, some darker place where the pain could not reach him. Maybe that was mercy. She did not know anymore. The farmhouse was small, just a front room with a stove, a table where she ate alone, and the bedroom where her husband had died. She brought the cowboy to the front room and laid him on the floor beside the fire. His shirt was soaked through on the left side, and when she peeled it back, she saw the wound. A bullet hole, clean and deliberate, the kind that spoke of intention. Someone had shot this man. Someone had wanted him dead. Margaret went to the pump and filled a basin with cold water. She tore an old petticoat into strips, one of the few things she had that was not essential for living, and came back to the fire. The cowboy's eyes were closed now, his breathing shallow and quick. His lips moved, but no words came out. Just shapes. Just the ghost of something he might have been trying to say. She cleaned the wound as gently as she could. The bullet was still inside him, she could tell. There was no exit wound, just the terrible puncture and the blood. So much blood. She had no way to get it out. All she could do was clean and bind and hope that infection did not come calling. As she worked, she found herself thinking of the Bible on her shelf. Her husband had read to her every evening, sitting in that chair by the fire. He would recite the verses about kindness to strangers, about the last judgment when the righteous would be separated from the wicked. He had been a good man, a rancher with calloused hands and a gentle way with animals. He believed that charity was not a choice. It was an obligation, woven into the fabric of faith itself. He had died believing that. Margaret had held his hand as he went, and she had not known, in those final hours, whether she believed anything at all. Now, kneeling beside this bleeding stranger, she found herself speaking the words anyway. Not out of faith, maybe, but out of habit. out of the memory of being loved by a man who had taught her that some things were true even when you could not see them. "I don't know who you are," she said quietly, pressing the cloth against the wound. "And I don't know what you've done. But you're here now, and I won't turn you out." The cowboy's eyes opened for just a moment. They were fever-bright and confused, but he looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his face shifted. It was like watching a man wake from a nightmare only to find the nightmare was real. His hand reached up and gripped her wrist, not hard, but with a kind of desperate gratitude. "Don't," he whispered. His voice was cracked, barely audible. "Don't be kind to me." Margaret did not ask him why. She did not ask him who had shot him or what he had done to deserve it. She simply finished binding his wound, covered him with a blanket, and sat by the fire all night, listening to him breathe, listening to the wind scratch at the windows, listening to the silence of a house that had been silent too long. By morning, he had not died. That was all she could ask for. That was all either of them could ask for in a world that had learned to be cruel to men like him, men with blood on their hands and roads behind them that would not let them rest. But something had changed in the night. Something had shifted in the space between them, small and fragile as a baby's breath, but present. She had given him shelter when the world wanted him dead. And he, somehow, in his fever dreams, he had already begun to change the shape of her world just by lying there, bleeding and broken, needing her as no one had needed her since her husband had closed his eyes for the last time. Neither of them knew it yet, but the threshold had been crossed. The door had been opened, and what came through it would demand everything either of them had left to give. By the third week, the fever had broken, but something else had taken its place. Thomas sat at her kitchen table each morning with his coffee growing cold, staring out the window at nothing. The wound on his side had closed, the infection never came, and his body had remembered how to heal. But his voice had forgotten how to speak. Margaret had learned the language of his silence. It was thick and layered, like sediment. She could read it in the way he flinched when the wind slammed the door, in how his hand went to his left side when he thought she wasn't watching, not to touch the wound, but to touch something beneath it, something inside. She could see it in the tremor that moved through his fingers when he held a cup, a tremor that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with the weight of memory. He was an outlaw. She had known this before she admitted it to herself. The proof came on a Tuesday morning. She had gone to the barn to feed the horses, and when she returned, she found his shirt folded on the chair. Not a careless folding, a careful one, deliberate, as if he was showing her something he could no longer hide. His back was a map of old violence. Whip marks, thin and white with age. Bullet scars, some clean, some ragged. Burns. And beneath all of it, a brand. She had seen brands on cattle. She had never seen one on a man. She did not scream. She did not turn away. She simply looked, and when he came back into the room, she was still standing there, his shirt in her hands. Their eyes met across the morning light, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a kind of witnessing. An acknowledgement that she saw him, not just the man he was now, but all the versions of him that had been marked by the world. "I'll heat your breakfast," she said finally, and she did. It was the locket that broke him. She found it the next day, hidden in the straw of the barn where he had slept his first few nights before she insisted he take the spare room. It was small and silver, worn smooth by years of hands. When she opened it, there was a portrait inside, a woman with dark hair and eyes that held both strength and sorrow. On the other side, a child, a boy maybe 4 years old, with the same dark eyes. She was holding it when Thomas came in for water. His face went white, then red, then white again. His jaw clenched so hard she thought his teeth might break. "That's not yours to look at," he said. His voice was low and careful, like he was holding back something vast and terrible. But Margaret did not give it back immediately. Instead, she looked at the portraits, then at him, then back again. "Who are they?" she asked quietly. "Nobody," he said. "They're nobody now." That night, she found him sitting on the porch steps, staring at the darkness. The locket was in his hands, catching the pale starlight. She sat beside him without invitation, and for a long time neither of them spoke. The crickets sang their autumn songs. The wind moved through the dry grass. The world turned on, indifferent to the human pain gathered on the porch of a small farmhouse on the edge of nothing. Her name was Sarah, he finally said. His voice was rough, like he had not used it in years. And the boy was mine. Was. Past tense. Margaret waited. She had learned that some stories could not be rushed. I was a ranch hand back in Texas, he continued, each word seeming to cost him something. Worked cattle drives, made decent money. Then I met her at a saloon in San Antonio. She was different from the other girls there. Quieter. She had a dream of leaving that place, of having something real. So I promised her I would give it to her. His fingers tightened around the locket. We ran off together. I found work on a ranch, and she had the boy. Thomas Jr. We were going to be a family. We were going to be. He stopped, swallowed hard. We were going to be good. What happened? Margaret asked, though she could already feel the shadow of it. The man who owned the ranch was angry I had left him without notice. He was cruel, Margaret. The kind of cruel that eats away at a man until there's nothing left but hate. He came after me one night, claimed I had stolen money. I hadn't, but he had men, and I had nothing. He beat me half to death, and when I tried to fight back, his voice broke. He said if I ever came back, he would hurt Sarah, hurt the boy. He said he would find them no matter where we went. Thomas opened the locket and stared at the portraits. So I left. I told her I would come back with money, that I was going to build us something safe. I promised I would be back within the season. Instead, I got caught up with some men who knew how to survive in ways that ranches don't teach you. We started stealing. Small things at first, then bigger. I thought I was protecting her. I thought the money would keep her safe. I thought I could outrun the debt I owed to that man. Margaret could see where this was going, and her heart, which had learned to be careful, began to break. 3 years, Thomas whispered. It took 3 years for me to save enough. I was coming back to get them, Margaret. I was so close. I had the money. I had a plan. I was going to take her and the boy somewhere far enough that the past couldn't find us. He closed the locket with a soft click. But when I got to the last town where I had word of them, I learned she had moved on. Met another man. A decent one, I heard. A shopkeeper. He was kind to the boy, gave them both a place to sleep and food to eat. And he looked at her then, and his eyes held a sorrow so deep it seemed to have no bottom. I let her go. I knew that trying to claim them would only bring danger to their door. So I left the money for her unsigned, and I rode away. Is that when you became an outlaw? Margaret asked. I was already one, Thomas said. But yes, that's when I stopped pretending I was becoming anything else. I rode with men who had nothing to lose and even less to live for. We took what we needed. We stayed 1 step ahead of the law and about 10 steps behind our own consciences. I got this, he gestured to his side, from a sheriff in New Mexico who got too close to the truth about who I was. He looked at the locket again. The wanted posters say I killed a man. I did. But it wasn't that shopkeeper. It was the ranch owner, finally caught up with him 10 years later on a dusty street outside a saloon. I put a bullet in him for what he did to us, even though by then I knew I was too late to save anything. The law has been after me ever since. Margaret sat with this, let it settle into the space between them like dust settling after a storm. She could feel the weight of his story, not as judgment, but as simple truth. This was a man who had tried to be good and had been bent by circumstance into becoming something broken. This was a man who carried the ghosts of the people he had loved in a small silver locket. Why did you tell me? She asked finally. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because you deserve to know what you're harboring. Because you should be afraid of me. And because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, while I was sitting at your table and tasting your biscuits and watching the way you move through a house like you're trying not to disturb the ghosts, somewhere in there, I stopped wanting to die. He turned to look at her then, and in his eyes she saw something she had not expected to see in the eyes of an outlaw. She saw hope, fragile and terrified and wholly undeserved, but there, like a flower growing through cracked stone. "And I think," he said very quietly, "that you might be the reason why." Margaret did not know what to say to this. She did not know how to answer a confession that was also a question, a plea, and a warning all at once. All she knew was that the man beside her was not what the wanted poster said. And worse, so much worse, was the terrible certainty that she would have to choose. Spring came the way it always does on the plains, sudden and violent, like the earth was breaking open from the inside. The snow melted into rivers. The grass turned green, so fast you could almost watch it happen. And Thomas, who had come to the farmhouse as a dying man, had become something else entirely. Margaret noticed it first in small things. The way he began to hum while he worked. How his hands stopped shaking when he held a cup of coffee. The afternoon he came in from fixing the fence and actually smiled. A real smile, not the ghost of one, but something warm and alive. She had thought she would never see a man smile like that again. She had thought her husband had taken all the light in the world with him when he died. She was wrong. They did not speak of love. It seemed too dangerous a word for what was growing between them, like saying it aloud might break whatever fragile thing held them together. Instead, they spoke through work. Thomas fixed what her husband's death had left broken. The roof that leaked, the corral that had collapsed, the pump that had gone dry. He worked the way a man works when he is building something instead of running from something. He worked like he had a future. Margaret cooked for him in ways she had not cooked for anyone since her husband died. She made biscuits with real butter. She baked a pie using the apples she had kept frozen through the winter. She let him sit at her table and eat like he belonged there. Because somehow, between the work and the silence, and the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, he had begun to belong. One evening in late April, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Thomas asked her to walk with him to the creek. The water was high from snowmelt, running loud and fast over the rocks. They stood on the bank and watched it flow, and Margaret thought about how water never stayed still, how it was always moving toward somewhere else. "I need to tell you something," Thomas said. His voice was careful, like he was choosing each word with his whole heart. She looked at him. He was thinner than he had been when he arrived, less haunted, but more present. The scar on his side had faded to a pale line, barely visible beneath his shirt. He looked like a man who had been given a second chance and was terrified of wasting it. "My past is catching up with me," he said. "I got word in town yesterday. There's a marshal asking about a man matching my description. And there's someone else, a man from Texas, the one I never told you about. The one who helped the ranch owner hurt me. He's here. He's looking for me." Margaret felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "How do you know?" she asked. "I saw him in the saloon. He didn't see me, but I recognized him. It's only a matter of time before they both find this place. And when they do, they'll find you." He turned to face her then, and his eyes held something that looked like resolution mixed with desperation. "I can't let that happen, Margaret. I won't let that happen." "What are you saying?" she asked, though she already knew. "I'm saying I have to leave. Tonight, if I can. I'm saying I have to ride out of here and draw them away from you. That's what I should have done the moment you let me through that door." Margaret felt something crack open inside her chest. All the careful things she had not allowed herself to say, all the careful distance she had maintained, all the reasons she had given herself for why this could not continue, all of it came pouring out like water through a broken dam. "No," she said simply. "Margaret, I said no." Her voice was stronger now. "I didn't pull you off that horse and bind your wounds and sit by your side all winter so you could ride away and get yourself killed by a marshal or a man seeking revenge. I didn't do that." Thomas stepped toward her. "You don't understand what I understand perfectly," she said. "I understand that you're trying to protect me by leaving. And I understand that you think leaving is the only noble thing left for you to do. But you're wrong, Thomas. You've been wrong about yourself since the moment I met you." The creek roared beside them, drowning out the world. I see a man who made mistakes trying to save people he loved, Margaret continued. I see a man who was broken by the world and has spent 10 years believing he deserved to stay broken. I see a man who came here half dead and let me save his life, and now he wants to throw that life away because he can't believe he deserves to keep it. Tears were running down her face now, but she did not wipe them away. But I'm not letting you go, she said. Not like this. Thomas reached into his pocket. His hand came out trembling, holding something small and metal. It took Margaret a moment to understand what she was looking at, a ring, old and worn, with a small stone that caught the last light of the dying sun. This was my mother's, he said quietly. It's all I have left of her. All I have left of anything that was good before the world got hold of me. He dropped to one knee in the dust beside the creek. Marry me, he said. Not because it will solve anything. Not because it will make the marshal go away or make the past disappear. Marry me because I am so tired of running, Margaret. I am so tired of being a ghost haunting my own life. Marry me and let me stop. Let me build something real with you. Let me be a husband instead of an outlaw. Margaret could not speak. The words would not come. I know I don't deserve you, Thomas continued, his voice breaking. I know the law will still come. I know we might have to run anyway. But at least we'll run together. At least I won't be alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, you could stop being alone too. He held the ring up to her, and in it, Margaret saw the reflection of the sky, burning red, burning gold, beautiful and terrible all at once. She thought of her husband. She thought of the years she had spent alone in this house, keeping his memory alive by tending to it like a grave. She thought of how love, real love, was not about safety or certainty or getting everything right. Real love was about choosing someone when the world told you not to. Real love was about building a life not in spite of the darkness, but alongside it, knowing that darkness would always be there, but choosing each other anyway. Yes, she whispered. Thomas stood and slipped the ring onto her finger. It was too big and it was cold, and it fit her like nothing else in the world fit her. Perfectly wrong, perfectly right, perfectly true. But as he held her against his chest, listening to the creek roar around them, and feeling the last light of day fade from the sky, Margaret understood the terrible beauty of what they had chosen. They were not going to ride off into safety. They were not going to escape. The law would come. The past would come. And when it did, they would face it together, bound not by circumstance, but by a choice that neither of them could take back. They were no longer two broken people seeking shelter. They were one, scarred, marked, hunted. And yet somehow, standing together in the dust and fading light, they had never felt more alive. They rode through the night without stopping. The road beneath the horses' hooves was pale in the moonlight, like a scar running across the desert's dark skin. Margaret sat behind Thomas, her arms around his waist, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. They had married that afternoon in front of the preacher in town, a ceremony that lasted 5 minutes and would haunt both of them forever, because it was real in ways that mattered and illegal in ways that did not. The marshal had arrived at the farmhouse 2 hours after they had spoken their vows. Thomas had seen him coming from a long way off, dust rising on the horizon, the glint of a badge catching the late sun. Without a word, he had taken Margaret's hand and led her to the barn. They had saddled 2 horses, and he had given her the choice: stay and say you knew nothing, or come with him into whatever waited beyond the edge of the known world. She had chosen him. She had chosen the desert. Now, as the night deepened around them and the stars multiplied overhead like promises, Margaret thought about everything she had left behind. The farmhouse, the orchard her husband had planted, the quiet life she had protected so carefully, as if stillness could keep grief from finding her. All of it was gone now, traded for this, for a man whose hand still carried the memory of violence, for a future that had no map, for the terrifying freedom of choosing love when the whole world said she should choose safety. They rode until the horses could barely lift their hooves. Then they stopped in a canyon where the walls rose up red and ancient, sheltering them from the wind. Thomas helped Margaret down, and she felt the ache in her legs, the dust that had worked its way into every crevice of her body. They had nothing with them. No supplies, no spare clothes, no money except the small amount Thomas had hidden away years ago for emergencies he had never expected to survive long enough to face. "Are you afraid?" Thomas asked. They sat close to a small fire he had built, though the flames served little purpose except to push back the darkness for a little while. Margaret thought about the question. She thought about the marshal's face when he had found the house empty, the outlaw who was hunting Thomas, the law that was surely gathering behind them like vultures. She thought about how everything she had known was now ashes. "Yes," she said simply, "but not of what you think." Thomas turned to look at her. In the firelight, the scar on his side was invisible, but she knew it was there. All of him was like that now, marked by violence, yet carrying something that the violence had failed to break. "What are you afraid of?" he asked. "That I'll wake up and discover I'm still alone," she said. "That this was just another grief dream, and I'll have to go back to that empty house and that empty life and pretend my heart didn't learn it could beat again." Thomas reached for her then, and he held her the way a man holds something he cannot bear to lose. They sat like that through the long hours before dawn, and neither of them spoke. Words were too small for what needed saying. Words were for people who still believed the world could be explained. By the time the sun rose, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and orange, they both understood something that had not been true the day before. They were not running away from something. They were running toward something. They were running toward whatever life they could build together, in whatever time the world allowed them. Over the next weeks, they learned how to be outlaws in the truest sense. They rode through territories where the law's reach was thin and uncertain. They stopped in small towns where no one asked questions and everyone minded their own business. Thomas took work where he could find it, breaking horses, helping with cattle drives, the kind of labor that a man could do and then disappear from without leaving a name behind. Margaret cooked in the kitchens of boarding houses and saloons, her widow's clothes and weathered hands making her invisible in the way that only a woman of a certain age and certain sorrow could be. They saved their money. They made a plan to go to the territories, where settlers were building new towns on land that had no memory of who they had been. But the road there was long, and danger waited in unexpected places. One night, in a canyon not unlike the one where they had first stopped, they heard the sound of hoofbeats. Not the organized pursuit of the law, but something worse, the lone rider who had been tracking them since Texas. Thomas knew this before Margaret did. She could see it in the way his hand went to the knife at his belt, in how his body went very still. "Stay here," he said. "No," Margaret replied. She had learned that word well in the weeks since their wedding. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, understanding that this woman who had saved his life by offering shelter had saved it all over again by refusing to let him face the darkness alone. He walked out to meet the man, and Margaret watched from the shadows. She saw the conversation, though she could not hear the words. She saw Thomas stand firm, not as a gunfighter, but as a man who had finally stopped running. She saw the other man reach for his gun, and she saw Thomas do nothing to stop him. But before the gun could clear its holster, before violence could erase another moment of the fragile peace they had built, the man suddenly lowered his weapon. Margaret watched his shoulders slump, watched him turn away, heard him ride back into the darkness without looking back. Later, when Thomas returned to her, she did not ask what he had said. Instead, she held him while he wept, not from fear, but from the terrible weight of carrying your own history for so long that forgiveness, when it finally came, felt like a kind of death. The territories were still far away. The marshal was still searching. The law would never forget his face. But as Thomas and Margaret rode on through the desert dawn, with the red rocks falling away behind them and the road stretching ahead into possibility, they understood something that neither the law nor the world could take from them. They had chosen each other. They had chosen to believe in redemption, not because the world had given them permission, but because love, true love, did not require the world's approval. Love was the quiet defiance of two broken people saying yes when everyone else said no. Love was building a home in the ruins. Love was the answer to a question the world would never ask them, because the world had already decided their story should end in darkness. But they knew better. They had learned, in dust and silence, and the desperate beauty of the hard way, that stories could be rewritten by those brave enough to hold each other and refuse to let go. As the sun climbed higher and the desert stretched endlessly before them, Margaret rested her head against Thomas's back and whispered a prayer, not to the God of judgment, but to the God of second chances. And somewhere in the wind that moved across the red rocks and the sage, she felt an answer, gentle and certain, that some loves were worth everything, and that redemption was not something you found, it was something you built, day by day, with a person who chose to stand beside you when the whole world said you should stand alone.